We are live. Hi, and welcome to our webinar, What It Takes to Become an Avian Veterinarian with Dr. Stephanie Lamb. Happy Friday, Dr. Lamb. Thank you for joining us.
Happy Friday.
And Arroyo, that's Arroyo in the background?
That's Arroyo in the background. Looks like he's about to take a nap.
Oh, good. Yes, he is. He looks very, very chillaxed. So let's give people like a minute here to log in, because I think we have a lot of territory to cover and probably some questions as well. So Ollie, wait, question for you. So being a veterinarian, do you get a lot of questions from your non-feathered or furred family members and friends, like health issues? Do you get all these?
Yeah, of course.
Like whenever someone gets a cold, they're like, is this a cold? Or, I mean, do you get like all sorts of questions from humans?
Probably the worst one is from my husband.
Oh, right.
He always asks me medical things first.
That's right. I figured as much. Well, I mean, if you have the aptitude for, medicine with animals, or with, humans are animals. So there you go. I figured you probably know all. That's good. So, so yeah, I could imagine you'd be the go-to source in your house for any kind of medical advice.
And from friends too, we'll get calls quite a bit. So.
Oh my goodness, I can only imagine. That's really, and probably, I mean, and obviously it's a no-brainer that you probably get questions about dogs and cats and all animals.
Yeah, absolutely. That, I would say the majority of the time when I say I'm a veterinarian, people often think that I must be working on dogs and cats. And though I do a little teeny tiny bit of dogs and cats, I really don't do much dog and cat at all. And I often will say the dogs and cats are what's exotic to me. So because since I work with birds and exotics, so I tell people I work with birds and exotics, and then usually the number one question that I get is, what's the most exotic animal you've ever worked on? And I always have a hard time answering that question, because what's exotic for one person isn't necessarily exotic for another. And since I so frequently see a dog or a cat, sometimes I'm like, a dog.
Oh, that is great. That's yeah, that's actually pretty, I guess, yeah, that would be par for course there. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then I imagine if you're a dog or cat vet, you're like, oh my goodness, it's a bird. It's totally different body system then.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, if you're just joining us here at the What It Takes to be an Avian Veterinarian with Dr. Stephanie Lamb webinar, and just a reminder, let's see if we have time for questions, to use the Q&A button and not the chat feature. So use the Q&A button if you have a question. And this will be fun. I am dying to know, because you kind of you might have a sense of what it becomes to be an avian veterinarian. Obviously, I think a love for your subject matter becomes a focus. Just a genuine interest. So I'd love to hear more about just your journey, and also your background, and what drew you to being an exotic vet. So
sure. All right. Well, so and I want people to definitely feel free to ask questions that we can go over at the end, because I'm sure there's several people out there who are maybe wanting to go down this path. And I don't know if I'll get all the things said that need to be said. So hopefully people should feel comfortable to ask questions that I can answer at the end. So, to become an avian veterinarian, it is quite a bit of work and a bit of time commitment for sure. You start off by first having to get a degree, an undergraduate degree, in really anything that you want it to be. A lot of people will choose a 4-year undergraduate degree in something like biology, because in order to get into veterinary school, you have to meet very specific requirements of certain classes that you had. Because when you're getting into veterinary school, you have to have a good scientific background, because you're going to be using a lot of that science to learn different organ systems and pathophysiology and how to treat animals. And so having a scientific background is really important, but veterinary schools don't require you to have a degree in a science fields. You just have to have a 4-year bachelor's degree. But a lot of people choose chemistry, biology, animal science, those sort of things, because it hits a lot of the requirements that they want you to have as prerequisites to apply to veterinary school. So that's what I did. I chose to do a 4-year degree in biology. And pretty much most universities have a biology degree available. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, so I went to UNLV for my undergraduate degree, and I absolutely loved biology. I really felt like it was a great segue to get me into veterinary school and make sure that it was what I wanted to be doing. So you have that 4-year undergrad degree, and then for vet school typically is going to also be another 4 years. That's in the US. There are some other countries where it's not 4 years, or you don't have to have that undergraduate degree. So this talk really is sort of focused mostly on US requirements, but you have your 4-year undergrad and then your 4 years of vet school. When it comes to veterinary schools, I believe currently there's 30 veterinary schools in the US. So not every state has a veterinary school. So I was from Nevada, and Nevada does not have a veterinary school. So I had to choose one of the out-of-state schools to go to. And the different veterinary schools, you really are going to be learning a lot of the same information, but there's certain schools that maybe have something unique about them that may attract an applicant to that school over another. I chose the University of Minnesota. The reason I chose that one is because I knew I liked birds and I knew I wanted to work with birds. And they had the Minnesota Raptor Center. And I had known about the Raptor Center from when I was a teenager. I think is when I had first heard about the Minnesota Raptor Center. I really liked all kinds of birds. I really liked raptors. And when I found out about that place, and then I found out they had a veterinary school, I said, that's where I want to go. Now, there's plenty of other good schools out there too that do have exotics focus or have, some bird things, but there's some schools that really don't have exotic or bird focus at all. And even at the University of Minnesota, even though they had the Minnesota Raptor Center there, they really, the veterinary hospital in the school, because the schools have a veterinary hospital, so that they're teaching hospitals where people are coming and bringing their pets just like normal, but students are the first one that are seeing those pets and getting to evaluate the pets first, and then they have to go to their professor, talk with their professor, come up with a plan of what they want to do. The professor says, yes or no, helps guide them along to get to where they need to help that animal appropriately. And in the veterinary hospital at the University of Minnesota, they didn't see any birds, they didn't see any exotics. So, but if you went across the street to the Minnesota Raptor Center, which was on campus, that's where you could go to get your bird experience. Some veterinary schools are different. Some veterinary schools, they do see birds, they do see other exotics, that sort of thing, and we'll have the students be seeing them right away. So, but when you're in veterinary school, again, it's 4 years of education that you're getting, and it really is focused mostly dog, cat, horse, cattle. Those are the big 4 species that you're going to be seeing and learning about in veterinary school. You do get a little bit of information about everything, even fish, and even I had an invertebrate lecture as well. One invertebrate lecture, all the lectures in vet school. But it's really focused those 4 species. So if you're interested in something other than one of those 4 species, you do have to do quite a bit of extra stuff. We were required to have 1 avian core class. So I knew I was going into vet school. I knew I wanted to work with birds. I hit all the basic stuff that we needed to do, but then with working, because I wanted to work with birds, I had to do additional stuff and take additional electives that were bird focused. Every vet student in my class had to take the one avian core class. And that one avian core class was 1 week of 9 to 5 bird lectures, bird medicine, but it was really only a week. So you can't possibly learn everything you need to know about avian medicine to take care of a bird appropriately in 1 week period of time. It's, it's 40 hours, 9 to 5, 1 week, 40 hours of education is not enough education to be able to take care of a bird. But I had that basic class, and then they did offer additional electives for birds. So there was a companion bird elective that I had taken. And then when I was on my rotations, because your first 3 years of veterinary school, you're in a classroom. But then your last year of veterinary school, you are actually in the clinics seeing patients, and you're on what we call rotations. And rotations are 2-week to 4-week periods of time where you're moving from one part of the university to another. So you're working in different specialties. So you're trying to get a really good, well-rounded education. You may be in surgery for, one of those blocks, or dermatology or ophthalmology, internal medicine. So all the specialties that you can think of that we know of in human medicine are available in veterinary medicine as well. And so they're in your senior year of vet school, shifting you throughout all those different parts of veterinary medicine. And in that, they did have a companion bird rotation for us and a raptor rotation for us. So I chose to take those as well, because I tried to take every single thing that I could that was bird related. So that's where I got some of my time in the hospital, at the teaching hospital at the University of Minnesota, working with birds. But then they also allow you what's called externships. So during externships, you have, again, these blocks of time where you get to go out to different places, different hospitals or zoos, facilities, to learn about veterinary medicine outside of the teaching hospital. And every externship that I possibly could take, I did, because you could take a few amount of externships or a large amount, and I took a large amount. I took the maximum that I could, and I did them all at exotic hospitals and bird hospitals, so that I could get the maximum amount of time working underneath qualified avian veterinarians and really learning from the best of the best that are out there. So the other thing, though, is while you're in vet school too, there are little symposiums and conferences that are happening, both for students, but also for people who are out of school, veterinarians who are actively seeing patients and just continuing their education. Because one thing's for sure is, when you're a veterinarian, you never stop learning, ever. If you don't like learning, veterinary medicine is not for you. Or if you don't like change, that's the other thing too, because it's always changing. Because as we learn new things and we advance veterinary medicine, we have to be able to adjust to the changes where, we once maybe thought something was the latest and greatest information, and then we learn that, well, maybe that actually isn't, and we need to adjust to what something new evidence has come out to say what's really the best thing to help patients. So during vet school, I did go to as many of those little conferences and symposiums as I possibly could as well. So I had my regular schooling, but then when they had the symposiums and conferences on the weekends, I would be going to those symposiums and conferences on the weekends as well, when they were exotic and avian focused, so that I could, again, just get every last little bit of information in my brain about birds. And what's also good is you need to repeat a lot of the stuff that you learn too. So having the repetition sometimes of, okay, I already learned this in class a little bit, but now I'm learning it again at the symposium, kind of sinks it in your mind a little bit more. And so just, doing as much as I possibly could was what I did. Also during vet school, I did work at a hospital on the weekends and during like the summer time that was an exotics and avian focused hospital. Again, so that I could just have my foot in that door and be watching the other veterinarians and getting used to the differences between dog and cat medicine versus avian medicine, because there are some unique things, because heck, they're totally different species. I mean, we're talking about mammals for the dogs and cats, and we're talking about, you know, avians for the 10,000 different species of birds that are out there. So that's the basics of getting a little bit of information in veterinary medicine regarding birds. So 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of vet school, and then during vet school, taking those additional externships and opportunities that are out there to gain as much knowledge as possible. But then when you graduate from veterinary school, you know, you're a veterinarian, you can see any species that's out there. But even then, it's still not enough. Because again, there's just so much to learn. And it's also getting used to working with the different species and handling different species. So I knew that I needed a lot more education than what I had gotten during my time in vet school. So I elected to do an internship. And an internship is typically a year period of time, most of the time it's a year, where you're working at a specific veterinary hospital, getting to see patients like a regular veterinarian, but still having the oversight that you had in veterinary school. So you're the doctor, you're the one who's seeing those animals, but you still have somebody that you can go back to and say, hey, can I ask you about this case? Can you check me on this? Can you make sure that my thought process is correct here and I'm doing the right thing for this patient? And I think that's really important for people who want to work with birds to do. Maybe not everybody needs it, but I think most do need it, because the amount of stuff that you're learning in veterinary school about birds, even with doing all the externships and symposiums and trying to do as much independent learning as you can, it's not the same degree of knowledge that you get about dogs and cats in veterinary school. And so if you're thinking like dogs and cats, you're coming out there with 4 years of knowledge of these species, and just a teeny subset of that is bird focused, you know, you need additional training afterwards to really do right by them. So a year internship is often a really good thing to do if anybody's interested in wanting to see birds. That's what I did. And then even after that, I was like, I still want even more knowledge than that. And I chose to do a residency. Now, a residency is when you do a residency if you're going to specialize in something. So if you want to specialize in birds, or say you want to specialize in dentistry or surgery or ophthalmology, oncology, any of this like little specialties, you do a residency so that you focus exactly on that thing to become the specialist in that area. So that's what I chose to do, is I chose to do a residency after my internship. And the residencies are usually a 2 to 3 year period of time, depending upon where you decide to do a residency. And there's a couple different options out there that can get you good knowledge and information and experience working with birds. The one that I chose to do was through a specialty group called the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners. So if you look at my name, my credentials after my name, so my name's Stephanie Lamb, and then it says DVM, and DVM is Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. Some people have VMD, that's Veterinary Medical Doctor, or there's some other ones that could be present after a person's name if they've gone to school in another country. But then after that, my name, it says DIPL, which stands for diplomat, ABVP, which stands for American Board of Veterinary Practitioners, and then it says avian practice after that. So that's my specialty. And that's the group that I decided to do my residency through. There are also zoo residencies that do a equally great experience and knowledge in birds, but they're zoo credentials. So that one would be ACZM, and like the European one is ECZM, I believe. So those are the kind of, there's different groups out there that you could get your board certification under, but there's only a few. There's not a ton out there. There's only a few groups that you can get your board certification under. But when you're getting boarded and becoming a specialist, there's a whole lot you're doing in that few-year period of time. For me, I ended up doing my board certification over a 2-year period of time. And in that period of time, all my patients that I was seeing, I had to like keep logs of every single patient that I was seeing. And I had to do several procedures in a week, surgeries. I had to do presentations about disease processes to other veterinarians and educate other veterinarians. I had to write papers and get published as well in scientific journals. So it was quite a bit of work. I don't remember how many hours it was that I would work in a week, but it was a lot. But I loved it because veterinary medicine is my passion, and avian veterinary medicine is even more so my passion. So it was definitely worth the experience. But once I got finished with my residency, you do all this stuff during your residency, and then you have to take a test at the end, and in order to actually say that you are a specialist. And you know, as a veterinarian, I've taken lots and lots and lots of tests in my life. I mean, you know, 4 years of undergraduate work, 4 years of veterinary school, tons of tests. But I think that test to become a board certified avian specialist was the most difficult test I have ever taken. It's very, they test you on like pretty much all the knowledge in avian medicine that is out there that has been published over many years. And they ask you like the minutest of detail so that they can make sure that you are, you know, good at what you are going to be specializing in. So, you know, when you look at that, how long did that period of time take to become a boarded avian specialist? 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of veterinary school, 1 year internship. For me, I did a 2-year residency, but sometimes it's a 3-year residency. So for me, it was 11 years. Some people it's 12 years, and some people will even do a couple of internships as well. So sometimes it's even more than that. So you're looking at, you know, average around 12 years of education to become an avian specialist. So it is a lot of work, but it's certainly worth it. There's the important thing to know about taking your pet bird to someone who specializes in birds versus a regular veterinarian. And I'm not saying that there aren't fabulous veterinarians out there who do a wonderful job with birds who are not specialists, because there are some people who are not specialists who do a fabulous, wonderful job with birds. But those people have gone the extra route of educating themselves with all those like externships and symposiums and conferences and just staying on top of what is developing in avian medicine to be able to take care of these animals appropriately. But there's some people who you know don't specialize in birds, that don't really see them frequently, who maybe wouldn't be as good of an idea to have your bird seen by, as opposed to somebody who sees birds much more frequently or is a specialist. And it's not because there's anything wrong with that veterinarian, it's just, it goes back to the education. If you want to see birds and you want to work with birds, you don't get much time in veterinary school. A week, because that was, if you didn't want to see birds, in veterinary school, you only had to take that 1 week core avian class, and that's it. And to think of seeing a bird after only 40 hours of education compared to the, I don't even know how many hours of education in dog and cat medicine that we would get, it's just not enough. And the other thing too is the experience of how to handle a bird and how to dose medication appropriately for them, and what things you can and can't do that are different between dogs and cats and birds, because there's just certain things that don't apply, for a dog or for a bird compared to a dog or a cat. And the other thing is this sort of specialized equipment that is necessary as well. And I have a couple of little examples that I wanted to show you guys. So when you work with birds, these animals are, some of them extremely tiny. There was a small passerine patient that I had about a month or so ago that I needed to do surgery on. And that bird weighed only 32 or 34 grams. So that's a really teeny tiny bird. Arroyo here is like 420 grams, I think. So, I mean, you can imagine just the size difference between him and that size bird that I had to do surgery on. So I brought some examples of instruments. You have to have really teeny tiny instruments in order to appropriately do surgery on some of these really teeny tiny animals. So I brought an example. These are just some forceps, but this is like a regular dog cat size forcep. Hopefully that kind of comes up okay. And then next to it is the teeny,
oh my goodness,
tiny avian forceps. So you can see like the vast difference in like instrumentation. And if you just work with dogs or cats, you might not have these teeny tiny little things. And it's extremely important to have these teeny tiny little things because this allows you to have a lot more fine motor control when you're doing surgery on a teeny tiny 30-gram bird as opposed to this giant thing that is, like a quarter of the bird's body weight, and so having that specialized equipment is going to be found in a hospital that works with birds specifically, as opposed to a hospital that just does dogs and cats and maybe a teeny tiny bit of birds on the side. As an example as well, I brought one of our little scopes that we have, and unfortunately, see, because we do birds and exotics only at this hospital, we don't do dogs and cats. So I don't have some of the equipment that's necessary for dog and cat stuff. And I really wish I had an example of the endoscope that is used in a dog or a cat, because I want to show you guys the endoscopes that we use in birds. An endoscope is a scope that's used to put into a body cavity to evaluate internal organs, or sometimes we'll put it like in the mouth to like look down, scope down into the gastrointestinal tract or up the cloaca, kind of look in different areas. And our little scopes are this teeny tiny little thing. I mean, you can see it's really only like 2 millimeters, the end of this tiny scope that I have to
like a coffee straw.
Yeah,
Coffee straw.
it's even maybe a little smaller than a coffee straw, honestly. But if this was a scope that I was using on a dog or a cat, the circumference of it would be like quite a bit more. Here's just a regular like pen compared to this thing, and a regular scope for a dog or a cat would probably be like 2 times the size of a regular pen. So I don't have the equipment that's large for a dog or a cat to use, but a dog or cat hospital may not have the small delicate equipment that's needed for a bird. Now, again, that's also not to say that some of the dog and cat hospitals can't see birds. They may do more of like easy little things here and there. But one thing that's really important is to know when to refer. And that's something that's really, I think, says a lot about a veterinarian and their level of competence about a problem. Because the reality is you're never going to know everything. Even me being an avian specialist, I kind of laugh about it a little bit sometimes because there's 10,000 species of birds out there. There's no way that I can know everything about 10,000 species of birds. It's just not possible. So, you know, that same thing goes for, you know, other species. There's no way that you could really know the depth of knowledge and specialize in each individual tiny little different species that's out there. So it's good to be able to know your limits and say, hey, I can handle this particular problem here or there. I can deal with some minor things, but you know what? If a bigger problem comes up, we need to know who to refer to, who is a specialist in this particular area to help us out. And I mean, I refer things frequently, even with birds. When I have a patient who has, like, for example, a heart problem, I am always referring to a cardiologist for a heart problem, even with a bird patient. There's a great cardiologist that I know who works with all animals, but he likes to work with birds. And so when I have a heart patient, I need him to help me out because my specialty is not the cardiovascular system. And so, you know, I will refer when we need to. And having the ability to do that really gets the animal the best care that it needs as an individual. And so some people may be in parts of the world where maybe there isn't a specialist who's close by, but having an individual who they can go to who is well educated about birds, and sometimes even maybe that individual is really well educated, but maybe they don't want to do the more specialized things, as long as they know who to send the individual to is really important. And sometimes we'll have people who refer to us for care that live maybe 4 hours away, and they'll do the basic stuff, but then when there's something more serious that needs some surgery or some major procedure that they're not comfortable with, then they'll send them our way to help them out. So the other thing that I kind of alluded to in the beginning is the conferences and things that once you're a veterinarian, you're out of school, that education doesn't stop. That is an absolute truth. Education never stops. We're constantly learning new things. And it's really important for people who are seeing birds to be going to conferences and keeping up with their continuing education so that they can meet the demands of what these guys need and what we know more about. And so, most veterinarians are going to at least one conference a year, or sometimes a few conferences a year, or doing online continuing education, learning from their peers and other specialists about new stuff that's out there. So a couple other things that I wanted to talk about as well about being an avian veterinarian. I kind of told you guys like the pathway to get there, the specialty and everything. But I think there's one thing that sometimes people will say is, well, why is it so much more expensive coming to an avian veterinarian than going to my dog or cat veterinarian? And it's true, it is more expensive to have medical care for a pet bird sometimes than it is for a pet dog. And some of that goes to the fact that, again, there's way more people that get to work with dogs and cats, and there's a whole lot more knowledge about dog and cat medicine than there is about bird medicine. So you have a whole more subset group of people who are able to work with them, work with birds. So I think that sometimes makes it a little bit more expensive because they have to go through more training in order to be able to work with birds. And it costs money to go to veterinary school. It costs money to go to undergraduate. It costs money to go to conferences. So, all the stuff that it takes to become a veterinarian costs a lot of money. So unfortunately, just the way that economy works, you have to charge for things in order to make up for those costs of all that education, that continuing education, but then also that specialized equipment as well. And also there's specialized laboratories that like tests are sent off to for exotics and birds. So there's some like bigger laboratories that are all over the country, multiple locations in different states. But maybe they're not, just like a typical veterinarian is not specialized in dealing with samples from birds. And so they may not have all the tests that need to be done or the specific infectious diseases that need to be checked for. And so a lot of tests that are done on birds need to go to specialized laboratories. And they're not always in the same region, state, or where the bird is, so sometimes these tests that we do that are going to these specialized laboratories have to be shipped overnight to a laboratory quite a ways away, as opposed to your standard dog or cat laboratories where there's multiple ones within a city area that you can easily get the tests to and have results in quickly. Sometimes it takes a little longer and has to go farther to get the specialized testing that's done. And you really want to have those specialized laboratories be evaluating bird blood work or bird diagnostic samples to really get an accurate answer. I have, unfortunately, experienced times where I've sent like blood work or a biopsy to a lab that was not specialized in birds, got some weird results that I was like, that doesn't make sense for this particular individual. And then send same samples to a lab that specializes in birds and get totally different answers, which is absolutely not what you want to have, So it goes to show you that you really need to have those specialized labs be looking at those diagnostics that have been taken to get the most accurate answers. Because nobody wants to run a test and have results that don't mean anything. And that's pointless and everybody's upset. So, that partially becomes part of the expense as well. If you only have a few labs that are dealing with these analyzing these samples, it becomes a bit more expensive. So, and then the medications as well, there's certain medications that you cannot give to birds, but you can give to a dog or a cat, and the other way around. And some of those medications are also really needing to be compounded, which means they are made into like a smaller size specifically for a bird, because there are like most of the veterinary medications that are on the market are labeled for dogs, cats, horses, cattle, pigs, those more common species. But some of those medications still work just fine for a bird, but they may not be in a form that, like, the form may be too strong, too concentrated for a bird to take. So then you have to work with specialized pharmacies as well, who are able to compound those medications to a concentration that works for a bird so that you're not overdosing an individual. That also brings up the point of dosing of medications as well. Birds actually have a really high metabolic rate. And so if you look at certain doses of medications in a dog or a cat compared to a bird, certain bird doses are massively, like, it would be a crazy overdose for a dog or a cat, but it's what a bird needs because their metabolic rate is so much faster that they burn through drugs quicker, certain drugs, and therefore need to have these higher doses than what you would expect for a dog or a cat. So if you go to a veterinarian who works with a dog or a cat and doesn't get to do much work with birds, they may not know the dosing for a particular like antibiotic for a bird, and may think, oh, well, it's this much in a dog or a cat, so it's probably this much in a bird, and they might be vastly underdosing the bird to where then it's not even doing anything, and then what's the point? Because nobody likes to give their birds medications, and nobody wants to give anything unnecessarily either for various reasons. So the knowing doses is really important as well. So, and then I kind of alluded to it a little bit before as well about like the handling. One of the first things that you learn when you're in veterinary school, really within the first like few weeks, is how to appropriately handle and restrain different species. Because if we're going to work with different animals, we need to know how to hold them appropriately so that they are not getting hurt and we are not getting hurt. Because if the human who's trying to help the animal gets hurt, then it's not going to work out as well. The animal's not going to get as much help as it could get potentially. So appropriate restraint and knowing how to do it is one of the very first things that you learn in veterinary school. But again, it's mostly focused dog, cat, horse, cattle. It's not really focused on birds. And so you have to learn how to appropriately handle different species of birds so that nobody gets hurt. It is different holding a parrot, a royal size, versus holding a little zebrafinch, versus holding a bald eagle or a crane or a duck. There's variations from one species to the next that you need to be aware of to know how to handle them appropriately. Because, for example, parrots, if they're going to do damage, it's going to be with that beak, and they're going to bite you with their beak. Raptors, if they're going to do damage, it's going to be with their feet. And if you don't know the difference and you're working, you think that, oh, they're all just birds, I can handle them the same, you are going to get hurt. Because if you're used to handling parrots for restraint and you go to handle a raptor for restraint, you're going to come out bleeding and it's not going to be very fun. But then also learning how to read a bird's body language is really, really, really important as well. Because if you are not aware of the different signals that they are giving you, eye pinning, fluffing up the feathers on their head, maybe bobbing their head, different things that our parrots may do. If you're not aware of how to read a bird's body language, then you might get hurt. And I think that's what deters some veterinarians from working with birds, is the fear of being injured. But if you know how to read their body language and you know how to appropriately and gently restrain them, it's going to be a low likelihood of being injured. I mean, granted, people do get hurt. I got bit today. That bird, who bit me, it wasn't his fault. He was saying, "Hey, I don't want you to touch me right now." So it's okay. I don't take any offense. But you can't take offense when it does happen too, because when they're here, they're just scared, and it's not their fault. And understanding that and still being able to work with them compassionately and not get upset is really, really important. Otherwise, you're not going to do a good job of taking care of them. I talked quite a bit there about being an avian veterinarian, what it takes to get there, the specialized equipment, the differences. But I'd like to answer any questions that people have in this last little bit of time.
Okay, well, we do have some great questions, and we've got people from like all over the globe watching this. So if you're like staying up late or getting up super early or somewhere in between, thank you for joining us, by the way, because it's pretty awesome to see all the participants from different areas. Hey, so Dr. Lamb, question for you about, you don't have the luxury of knowing when your patient comes in, whether it's male or female, by just looking at it, like a dog or cat that would know, okay, I'm going with the male dog, female cat. So just off of that, how do you know? Because you can't always go off of what the owner says, like, because they could be wrong unless they've had their bird DNA sexed or visually sexed, or endoscope, is it what the internally? Yeah. So how do you know, or how do you need to establish that in your treatment plan off the get-go? Or
it's something that's really good to have. I will say it kind of depends on the situation. We like to have that information, so it's something that's good to have the bird be DNA sexed, or certain species you can get an idea of those that do have the sexual dimorphic characteristics. But again, most of our parrots, I think last time we talked about 75% do not have sexually dimorphic appearances. So we do like to DNA sex them, but sometimes we aren't able to for one reason or another. And if it's something that's going to interfere or is going to be really important and necessary for part of our treatment plan and figuring out what's going on with this individual, then we highly, highly, highly recommend that testing be done. But there's certain conditions, like say a bird is coming in for a respiratory infection. Well, yeah, I'd love to know if it's a boy or a girl, but there's really no differences in treatment in that regard. So.
Okay, that's, or I mean, obviously, like an egg-bound hen, yeah,
Yes.
what you're dealing with.
Well, and it's funny because sometimes owners will bring a bird in and say it's a boy, and then it's here, but it's really sick, and they don't know what's going on, and I palpate it and I find an egg, and I'm like, well, it's not a boy.
Oh wow, you probably have some clients that leave there in astonishment, like, wait a second, my role's been turned upside down. All right, so we have a question from Ahmed. And they say that while doing masters in veterinary medicine in the USA, can we have enough time to prepare for the NAVLE, or how many chances to clear it? We have enough time to earn for our expenses in the USA. That was a question.
Okay, yeah, so the NAVLE, what that is that's actually the test to be a veterinarian in the US. And I realized I actually jumped over that because when you're done with veterinary school, you have to take the NAVLE test. And you pass that, and then you are a veterinarian. So that test, you can do that once you are able to work in the U.S. as a veterinarian, have passed that test. Then yeah, you can do an internship, you can do a residency whenever you want to. There really is no time constraint. It's not like you're going to have to do it at this very specific time after you've graduated from veterinary school or you missed the boat. So like my hospital, we have an internship and we have a residency program as part of our hospital so that we can help continue to educate more people and get more people into birds and other exotics doing veterinary medicine. And there's certain times of year where internships and residencies are starting, but there's never a time or limit in when in your career you do that. And we get people who apply, who've been a veterinarian for we had, I think this last year had one apply who'd been a veterinarian for 10 years and was wanting to do something different, And that's one of the beauties of veterinary medicine is that you can, because it is very broad at its base, you can change sort of your focus at different points in your career to do something else as long as you go and get the appropriate education for it.
Great, interesting. And then Adil asks, in most of Asian countries, we see veterinary doctors prescribing human medicines to birds. Is it fine to use them in emergency situations?
Yeah, so I mean, we use human medications as well. For example, doxycycline, that is a medication that people take, but we use it in dogs. We use it in birds. We use it in other animals. So it's still at its base, doxycycline, the antibiotic. So yes, human medications are used for birds. It's just considered to be off-label. And that's something that's really important to know is most medications that are used in birds are off-label. And that kind of scares people sometimes when they hear that, like, what do you mean you're using something that isn't labeled for my animal? Well, if we use something that was labeled for birds, we probably have like 5 drugs available to us, which is not enough to take care of all the problems that are out there. So we have to use things off-label, and it's okay. At its base, it is just this particular drug. Being off-label just means the company who makes that drug and manufactures it and puts it out there for sale didn't license it for that particular species. And when they didn't license it, the only reason they didn't license it is because it's a money thing. It is a lot of money to license a drug for a particular species. And the company who makes that drug is the one who is paying that money. And so if they can get a drug out there and on the market and it's labeled for maybe a couple of species, then they only, have to pay the cost to label it for those species, but it can still be used for tons and tons of other species. So it's purely a sort of a bureaucratic thing, I guess. So it sounds scary, but don't worry, it is done all the time.
Okay. And Raiko asks, what are the ways to graduate from a foreign veterinarian school and get a bird specialist in the US or Europe?
Yeah. So when you graduate from a foreign veterinary school and you want to come into the US, you have to take the NAVLE, but there is also a test that I'm completely forgetting the name of it right now. There's so many tests, but you take the NAVLE test, and then there's another test that I apologize, I'm forgetting it, but it's a test that foreigners have to come in, and it's about like a week-long test that they do, where it's really more of a test where they're seeing animals, they're doing surgeries, they're doing a lot of the basic things that U.S. graduate veterinarians should be able to do. And as long as they pass that test, then now they are able to work as a veterinarian in the U.S. And if they're able to work as a veterinarian in the U.S., then they're able to apply for an internship in the U.S. or a residency in the U.S. And then they go through the exact same process of becoming a certified specialist as any other individual who graduated from a veterinary school in the U.S.
Okay. And Victoria says, hi, I'm a veterinary student in Europe. And as you mentioned, we are not required to have a bachelor's degree before applying to vet school. However, our vet degree is a 6-year degree. So the question is, in order to practice in the US, I would have to do extra tests. And we talked about the NAVLE, if I'm not mistaken. But when it comes to residencies, would I need to do that testing before doing a residency in the US, or is it all right since it would have been under the same kind of supervision?
It depends on where you're applying through residency through. Like for many private practices, so like the hospital where I work, we are a private practice. Many private practices require the testing have been done and you be licensed as a veterinarian in the US first before applying. Some schools, though, that have residencies don't have that requirement. And so it really kind of depends on the individual location of where you are deciding to apply through, that you would want to check with that particular location and find out what their requirements are. But most of your private practices and any hospital or any place in the US, you do have to be able to work in the US as a veterinarian. So that is that NAVLE test plus the other test that I'm totally blanking on what the name of it is right now.
If we figure it out, we'll post it with the video.
I will look it up when we are done and I'll let you know.
Okay, and then Marlene asks, is it possible to apply for an internship at Arizona Exotic Animal Hospital being a veterinarian from Germany?
As long as you have the
NAVLE
and that test having been done, yes. As long as you are legally able to work in the US, then yes.
Okay, let's see. And let's see. Next. We have a lot of questions, so. Okay, so Adrian asks, are we starting to see more veterinary behaviorists in avian practices as we are in dog and cat practices and working with cooperative care procedures?
Yeah, absolutely.
That trend?
And in fact, there was just recently, so there's a group called Fear Free, and you can be Fear Free certified. And for the longest time, it was just you could get Fear Free certified in like dog and cat stuff. And they just came out with a Fear Free certification in birds, maybe like 6 months or so ago, maybe a year ago at this point. So a lot of people who do see birds that have taken that fear-free course and are certified in it. And it's a really great thing because, again, we want to not only help our birds with any medical problems they have, but we want them to be comfortable while they're here. And that's such an important thing. And low stress handling is an absolute must. And if you're working with birds, you have to know how to breed them and you have to provide low stress handling. Otherwise, it could be dangerous. So yes, it is. More people are certainly doing that.
Great. And then Kyle says, hi, Dr. Lamb. I'm in my 2nd year of vet school and was wondering, do you think you could have seen avian/exotics without doing a residency and being board certified? Do you think it's possible for an avian specialist to practice other branches of vet medicine, such as small animal?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. So, and I know several individuals who are not boarded specialists in avian medicine, but are doing avian medicine, exotic medicine, and dog and cat, and do it really well. But the thing is they continue to educate themselves and go to conferences. That is what makes all the difference. Is you have to continue to educate yourself. So you absolutely can be a fabulous veterinarian without doing an internship, without doing a residency, but you have to be committed to educating yourself in those species.
Okay. And then Joshua wants to know, how comparable would you say it is working in animal medicine to human medicine? That's a good
Well,
question.
it's a hard question for me to answer because I've never worked in human medicine. But what I would say is that there is a lot of stuff we do in avian medicine that people have no idea that we do, or in any veterinary field that veterinarians do that's very similar to human medicine, that when you tell a person, oh, I need to send your bird to the cardiologist, for example, they say, what? Cardiologists see birds? So we get things quite frequently where I say, I did this or that with a particular animal, and people are like, I had no idea you could do that. So pretty much anything you can do in human medicine, you can do in veterinary patients as well. But I've never worked in a human hospital, so I don't really know firsthand difference.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, you can like CPR, right, on birds?
Absolutely.
Okay, there you go. So Anthony wanted to know, would you define exotics for us? So what would be your definition? What is the definition of exotic?
Yeah, so the definition of exotics is pretty much anything that's not a dog, cat, horse, or farm animal. It's pretty much everything else. So birds, reptiles, small mammals like rabbits, rodents, ferrets, fish, invertebrates. Those are all in the exotics category.
Okay. And I'm imagining all those animals in your waiting room, and the snakes and the birds. The birds would probably be most afraid of the snake in there in that room. Right?
Well, I would say when snake owners bring their snakes in, a lot of times they actually bring them in a pillowcase. It's one of the most common ways to transport a snake. And snakes like it in there. It's dark. They're contained. So we really, even though we see large snakes, they're rarely seen by any of the other patients in the hospital.
Oh, that's
I would say the one patient that the birds seem to not like is the pigs, because we do see pot-bellied pigs, and pot-bellied pigs are rather loud, and sometimes the birds themselves are loud. I think sometimes they don't like the competition, maybe, of the screaming.
Oh, that's funny.
Pigs are quite
Oh man.
So
all right, so and then Imran says, hello, Dr. Lamb. What is the biggest challenge that you see as an avian veterinarian?
The biggest challenge that I see as an avian veterinarian, man, that's a good question. Well, one of the biggest challenges, I guess, is sometimes their size. We do have some limitations in what we can do based on the size of the animal. And when I get to work with like a bald eagle, and working with fixing their fractured bones, it's sometimes easier to work with because they're large. I can put larger pins in and stabilize things with a lot more confidence. But sometimes these teeny little like budgies, those guys are difficult, or cockatiels or little conures. They're teeny tiny little bones, and I usually don't like use any pins in the budgies because they're too tiny. But I will use pins in the conures, and a conure is only like a green sheet conure is probably about a 75-gram bird, and so those teeny tiny little pins that we put inside of those little conure legs, I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult. You can do it, but it's difficult. So I would say probably the biggest thing is the size, the biggest constraining factor.
Okay, and then Emma asks, can you explain explain for what we can use CE points? I've looked all around and I can't get a specific answer. I'm from Europe and no one can tell me. So CE points, what are those and how can you get them?
So CE points are continuing education points. And so those are what you have to do it depends on where you are as to how many CE points you need. So because she's in Europe, I don't know exactly what her CE requirements are. So for me in Arizona, well, I'm licensed in Arizona and I'm also licensed in California. And I have to have about like 20, 25 CE credits every 2 years. But honestly, I get way more than that because I'm going to the conferences a couple times a year, or at least once a year. And usually a conference, you get more than your CE needs in that, because they're continuing education hours. So it's, if I need 20 hours of education to maintain my veterinary license every 2 years. It's really not that much. You need way more than that to truly continue to learn and grow as a veterinarian. Places that you can go to get them: conferences. So there's veterinary conferences of many varieties all over the world. Online continuing education. Lafeber's does do online continuing education. Lafeber Vet does online continuing education. In fact, just this last weekend, I was out of the country on Sunday, and I was flying back into the country, and Lafeber Vet was having a CE, and I was sitting in the airport listening to the CE, and got, I think, like an hour of continuing education listening to CE, and learning, which is the real point of it. Looking for online sources or going to actual conferences is the way to get it. But you're going to have to contact the veterinary board of where you live to know how much continuing education you need to have and what that time frame is in which you need to have it.
Okay. And let's see, final question of the day. It looks like, okay, so this is from Sabir. Hi, Dr. Lam. I'm a veterinarian from Algeria. Unfortunately, the veterinary schools here don't focus a lot on avian medicine. Avian medicine has always been my point of interest, and I was trying to read a lot more and trying to educate myself. So now I'm looking for an international internship. Can you please recommend some schools or avian clinics or hospitals that I can apply to for an internship?
Yeah, so I know there's there's a falconry hospital in Dubai, and that's a really great one. But then, like, at the European veterinary colleges, at the veterinary colleges themselves, I know some of them do have either zoo or well, I think those ones actually are mostly zoo focused. But again, there's still a great place to get a lot of bird information, because a lot of zoos have quite a few birds. So it's a really good way to get that specialization. Within the US, there's a program called the MATCH program, and it's under the website is www.virmp.org, and that stands for Veterinary Internship and Residency Match Program.org. You can look that up, and that actually is the program that a lot of facilities use to put their internships, advertise their internships and residencies, and so you can see all the different ones that are out there in the US. I think it's US specific. That's where, like, we advertise ours, and then you can see those different facilities, what they have to offer, and if they are able to take foreign applicants or not. So
Okay. Wow. Okay, that was that's helpful. That's a good website to reference. I think that's all. We had 4 more questions. We'll see if we can get to them via email. So that was a lot to cover. You did a great job covering. It's a lot of work to become an avian vet, but it's well worth it, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So just real quick, I was going to announce today's, we have a giveaway of a Lafeber tropical fruit pellet bag of that food, as well as a food of your bird's choice to one of our lucky participants today. And that winner is Michael R. So Michael, someone from the Lafeber office will shoot you an email, reach out to you next week to send that out to you. And just a sneak preview of what we've got ahead. Next Friday, we're here with Dr. Tom Tolley for Ask the Vet. And then after that, we have Mark Bittner. He is, if you remember, they had the movie, the documentary, The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill, which was, it focused on, I believe, mostly cherry head conure flock up in San Francisco area. And Mark was their caretaker, I guess you could say. But he's, it'll be quite an interesting webinar to see what Mark's up to today, as well as, how the wild parrots are doing, that flock that he was taking great care of. So 2 exciting other webinars to look forward to. And then we'll be on with you, Dr. Lam. We have some webinar coming up with you with how to deal with a picky eater. So there you go. That's a big topic right there. So we have a lot of thank yous. Everyone's just like, if we could do applause, we would, because I'm just saying all that thank you from all these different great countries. So
awesome. Well, you're very welcome.
Yay. And Arroyo did a great job. He's just back there. He was walking around a little bit, eating on his little sign there, but he's back to just what you had no idea he was doing any of that, because he's back in the same position he was when you first looked at him. He's a smart bird. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Dr. Lamb, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And everyone have a great weekend. Stay safe and all the best to you and your flock. Bye.
Bye.